Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to start in just a minute or so. I'm Tom Douglas. I'm the superintendent here at Bethlehem Central. I want to thank you for coming out this evening to follow up and continue our discussion on the Common Core. This is about Common Core in the classroom, and as you look through the evening, there's handouts out front. There's going to be a lot of items that will be covered by our instructional staff and administrators here tonight, as well as some videos. And as always, we will always have information on the website that you can follow up, not only with this evening's information, but also with any additional information that comes out of this evening through our communication department. They will post it on our website as well. So as we begin, Common Core is obviously a topic of discussion across the state and across the nation. But here in Bethlehem, we wanted to take a proactive approach and start the discussion on Common Core with our community. Sort of recapping Common Core from the first night, or part one, we wanted to make sure that people understood that Common Core standards is really a group of standards that evolve around consistent expectations, goals, and a clear roadmap, as well as helping to prepare college and career readiness at a much deeper level. The biggest thing about the discussion of Common Core is not the fact that it's a curriculum, but it's a set of standards. So that also brings us to review what the Common Core is not, and this is probably where most of the controversy has evolved. The Common Core curriculum standards are not a curriculum. These are learning standards establishing broad-based objectives for what students will have learned by each given grade level. So that if a student is in grade 1 in Bethlehem Central, if that student moved to Buffalo, New York in grade 1, they would be expecting the same standard of performance at that point in their curriculum to meet the standards. Or if they left New York State and went to, say, Georgia, Tennessee, Utah, any other state where the student would have at least an understanding of where they should perform on the standards. The curriculum, however, is up to the district and how they meet that minimum standard. So we want to make sure that people understand that the Common Core is not a curriculum. It is also not a testing program. Although it's been blended into the testing program, that is because you have to assess your curriculum or your standards eventually. But the Common Core does not do the testing program. The test is an assessment of how we rise to the standard. And then last but not least, the Common Core is not an evaluation tool. Unfortunately, in New York State's rush to implementation, we had the Common Core standards, we had new testing to align to those standards, and on top of it, to top it all off, we also had an evaluation of our instructional staff based on standards or based on tests that were not ready for the field at the point that they came out. And I want to commend our faculty and staff here for rising to those occasions, even in light of such controversial times. So thank you very much to our faculty and staff. In addition, we have to talk about college and career readiness. So we have to understand, what does it mean to be college ready? Here it's more than just getting your high school diploma. What does that diploma stand for? To what level of rigor does it accomplish? But it's really making sure that college ready means being prepared for post-secondary education, as it states up here, training experiences, internships, part-time work related to any degree program. It also means developing your post-secondary credentials, your certificates, your licenses. Also, our students have to be ready to complete college-level coursework without the need of remedial classes. That is something that all schools try to address, but we work at the secondary level, and we want to make sure our students are ready for that post-secondary level. And at times, we are not in control to what rigor or level the colleges are going to establish for their incoming classes. But we will always rise to the standard, and I think that's what Bethlehem Central has been known for. Also, what does it mean to be career ready? Well, it means that you have to be able to communicate appropriately. You have to be able to work in teams. You have to employ critical thinking skills. And, it's really about unique ways to solve problems. And all of those skills, I think everybody understands that our students need, especially in a global economy and a global marketplace. So, having the experience to figure out real world problems, being able to analyze and get the true meaning from the information that you're given, and then also being able to defend the conclusions or the viewpoint that you've positioned yourself with, and examining all the evidence so that you make the best critical decisions that are there. So all those things are good skills, and that's really what the Common Core is about. So as we look to it, tonight we have gathered our professionals within our supervisor's office, our librarians, our teachers at the elementary and secondary level, really to expose you to what's going on in the classroom, because that's really what tonight is about. We're going to start off with ELA in the classroom, with discussing narrative and informative writing and close reading. We're going to talk about some of our library resources for the Common Core, math in the classroom, as well as a follow-up panel discussion. And we're not going to make them sit on stage as we go through the first part. But I want to thank all of our panelists for giving the time and preparation that was needed for tonight to make sure that we are available for Bethlehem Central's community. And then one last thing we'll talk about is resource implementation and testing to close out the night. But just before that, we'll have a short question and answer session that will be moderated by my assistant superintendent, Ms. Jody Monroe, and myself, and we'll have the microphones to ask some of the surveyed questions that have already come in, as well as, with time permitting, any other follow-up questions. Everything that's done tonight will be recorded and put on the website, as well as questions that we're unable to get through will also be followed up and placed on there as well. In addition, at the end of the night, we'll also be telling you about a parent initiative to also have on-the-ground level discussions for parents at the end of the month. So we want to thank you again for coming out tonight, and at this time, I'd like to lead us into Common Core in the classroom, English Language Arts, writing, started by one of our elementary teachers, Miss Valerie Falco.
Thank you. I'm glad to see you all. Tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about narrative writing and the Common Core. That will be my emphasis, but I'm going to touch on the other ones. So we've heard with Common Core, they're really emphasizing 3 types of writing. The first is narrative, and there was some controversy. We heard that kids weren't going to be writing narratives anymore. It was only going to be informational. But actually at the K-5 level, all 3 kinds of writing are equal. And in narrative, they're thinking about writing that informs, and mostly about their life. They're going to be relaying a situation that's imaginary, or one that they've been through. And one of the things that's really important is at every grade level, kids are going to be writing narrative. And we know one of the most powerful writing kids can do is writing about their own life. And so that's part of why we're going to see it at every grade level. Then there's informatory or explanatory writing. We have as young as kindergartners writing how-to books, what they're experts on, chapter books in second grade that come out of science. So at every grade level, the children are going to be thinking about what they know and how can they tell people what they know. And the one we hear the most about is argument and opinion writing, and it seems like it took over, but it really didn't. There's an emphasis on helping kids defend what they say, using textual evidence, finding facts to back what they're saying, and that's in the writing and in the reading, but it's no bigger than the other 3 levels. And I think that's a misconception that people hear. The only writing they're going to do is opinion writing. One of the things that we've spent a lot of time looking at is how can we make sure that the progression of writing and our expectations move up each year. And this is just a sample of a learning progression of what, if we were looking at narrative writing, what it would look like in first grade. So overall we're saying, did they tell a story, they drew it, they wrote it, and they have a whole story. And I think that's important. Some people say we're expecting so much of our kindergarten and first grade, but if you look carefully at the standards, in kindergarten it says draw, write, or dictate a story. So they're well aware that there are children who are not going to be using whole words, sentences, that they can tell their story with their pictures or by dictating to someone. So in first grade overall, we would be looking for them to, it says, told, drew, or wrote a whole story. By third grade, they're saying now they're going to tell the story bit by bit. They're going to understand that there's a very clear sequence of events, and some are more important than others. And then by fifth grade, they're looking at, they wrote a story of an important moment, and it read like a story. By the time they're in fifth grade, it should sound like a short story, something that actually happened. And we can look at each area, how they make transitions, the way they end a piece. This is just a snapshot, the way they begin. Each area moves up, and there's a greater expectation, but it builds on each other. What they learned in kindergarten, it's going to build on what first grade to second grade to third grade. So it's a very sequenced way to look at writing that builds on skills. And that progression, we're going to put up, we put the narrative here, but we're going to show you an informational piece, so we're going to make sure that the informational progression is available to you also, so you can see how that moves up. So we talked a little bit about the narrative progression, but we're going to show you an informational piece. One of the reasons that happened is as we go through the year, all of our classrooms are done with narrative writing and they're moved into informational or persuasive. So in order to show you what's actually happening in a classroom, we're going to show you a piece of a teacher teaching an informational unit lesson and then a child responding. And one of the things that I think is really exciting about this writing, the way we're looking at writing is, all the classrooms are using the same language, the same kinds of way we talk about leads, we talk about, we're going to hear about chapters, what you're experts on, and it really is building a cohesive language all the way through. So this is a first grade, and they're talking about chapter books, informational chapter books.
Ladies and gentlemen, informational book symphony. Informational books tell you facts.
Dogs.
Informational books use twin sentences.
Dogs.
Informational books teach the reader something.
Spiders.
Informational books are true. Informational books will teach someone something.
Basketball.
Excellent. So we all have topics. Now today, start to think about something. Emily, you're already thinking. What are your chapters? Patrick, with basketball, give us a chapter that's interesting, a title, it's short, and it's about your chapter.
I've only made one chapter right now, and it's Marks on the Court.
So it's called Marks on the Court? Excellent. What will your next chapter be, do you think?
How to play.
Oh, how to play. So you would kind of be like this, tell what the page is about, how to play. Anybody else have a chapter they want to share, a title for their chapter that's short, interesting, and also tells what the actual page is about? Owen, what's your topic?
Basketball.
Basketball. And what's your chapter called?
Swish.
Did everybody hear that? Swish. Now let me guess, what are you going to be writing about in that one?
Basketball.
And what about basketball? How to shoot, because when the ball goes through the net, it makes a swish sound. Is there?
So some of the things you noticed, they were choosing their own topics, things they felt comfortable with. They were definitely engaged in the lesson. And already in first grade, they were talking about planning out chapters and what were they going to say in each chapter. So already that beginning of what they didn't know, the paragraphs that would go in each chapter, that was the beginning just in first grade. The other thing I think that was really important to think about that is in the back, on the back table, there's a checklist, a packet for you of informational checklists and narrative checklists. And those are what the kids see. So up front, the children know what they're going to write and what's expected. And that checklist shows how they move from kindergarten all the way to the fifth grade. And that's not a surprise. It's not something they see at the end of their writing. They see it by the first or second session when they're writing. And now we're going to show you just a brief conference with one of the first graders.
So Julia, are you finishing your third chapter already? Yeah? And you chose flowers because you just like them? Now, would it be possible, would you be able to read me one of the chapters in your book?
Sure, I'll read this one. Flower colors. There are many flower colors. Flowers are like rainbows. Marigolds are yellow.
So just how well they do already with our writing standards. Thank you.
Next up will be Mr. Andrew Baker, our K through 12 ELA specialist. So we want to thank him for coming out tonight. So, and you can introduce him next afterwards.
Absolutely, I'll do that. Well, I don't think I can top that young lady's reading of that story, but I'll certainly try. Just want to say, first of all, I'm Andy Baker. I'm the ELA supervisor. It's great to see so many people here tonight. I really feel lucky to work in a district where the teachers are so dedicated to taking not just the standards to heart, but also the children to heart as we do this work. So it's really, really lucky to be a part of this district. I have the pleasure to talk to you tonight about the aspect of close reading at the middle school. And we do close reading throughout the district, but we're focusing just to give you some information to narrow that down, what that looks like at our middle level. The term close reading, to closely read text is not new. The Common Core didn't invent it. It's been around a long time, and like anything else in education, things come and go in cycles, but what we have is the term close reading coming directly from the Common Core language of reading closely to determine what the text says, as well as drawing inferences from the text, so that we want to train students to be able to read first for a literal understanding and interpretation of the basic meaning of the text, the comprehension, basically reading within the four corners of the text, as they say, as a starting place. So students are drawn to the text and are then able to gain skills in deciphering greater meaning from the text as they delve into that text again. To closely read means to read more than once with a purpose for delving more deeply into text to gain a deeper meaning, and it varies, for different purposes. But the basic gist of it is basically, as I've said, to reread text for a greater understanding, and it's something that the goal is for students to be able to do it on their own independently, not just to be taken through close reading with difficult text in a classroom where the text is challenging, and we want to challenge students, so we want to have a teacher that's guiding them, but also that they begin to develop the skills to do it independently. The basic process for close reading, from what we can gather in wanting to share with you the basic high points of it, are outlined on this slide. And again, it depends on the purpose, but the essential process of having students read the text once for the overall meaning and have a strong understanding of what the text is saying literally, and then going back to reading perhaps for greater detail, or reading for authorial intent, looking and analyzing at the language that the author's using, the word choice. In certain types of writing, we're going to be looking at more thematic and literary elements. In argument-based writing, we may be looking at author's bias, what intent is the author bringing, and really closely monitoring that. In the past, students will still, connect the reading to their lives, which is very important, and that there's still a place for that. But as we shift to a Common Core alignment, we're training kids to go to the text. What does the text say? Not just that the text reminds you of your summer vacation, and that's nice. But when you answer a question, it shouldn't be just off the top of your head. You want to have to go in to back it up in the text, and close reading trains students to do that. So we give a copy of text to the students. It's important that they be able to write directly on it. Again, students reread to determine the author's purpose, intended audience, authorial intent, deeper thematic language and structure, all of those things. And then we want to ask text-dependent questions. We want to make sure that our students are not sitting in an English class, listening to a conversation, not having read the text, and are able to then answer questions successfully at the end of the lesson, which is what many students have been able to do. Some will continue to be able to do this. Those kids will probably be a CEO of a company someday. But we want to really make sure that kids are able to be able to gain more deep and rich knowledge and not just get by with the basic gist of what the text is saying. So, my bad. We're going to show a video right now, clip of what text reading looks like in a 6th grade classroom.
Okay, the title of the article is Kids Get Diet of Junk Food Commercials. First of all, I want you in the margin to label the paragraphs, number them. You should have 1 through 7 on the front and 8 through 10 on the back. So just label them over in the margin. So just a reminder, you can circle things that you find interesting that you want to annotate in the edge, okay? If you circle things, make sure you put a little note over to the side why you circled it. Is it a question you have? Is it surprising? You can underline any important information, but make sure if you underline it, you're ready to tell me why you underlined it or why you thought it was important. You can put a question mark for things you don't understand. If you circle a vocabulary word you're unsure of, just put a question mark next to it so you know that's why you circled it, okay? And any other thoughts, comments, anything you have to say about it, just put it in the margins like I did. Let's look at the first paragraph. Did anybody highlight, underline, find anything interesting in the first paragraph they wanted to? Right? They're pointing out something about somebody else. Whoever this author is, we're already starting to see maybe the author has a little bit of what? Raj? A little bit of bias maybe, right? How about paragraph 2? Anybody find something interesting in paragraph 2? Maybe related to propaganda, persuasion, but maybe something else. Did anybody notice what year this article was written?
Yeah, 2007.
Yeah.
And then
So-
the reference is 2005.
Right, and they're talking about a study that was done in 2005. So even if they're saying for years, it could be like a year before that, it could be 10 years before that, and things have changed now, right? All things to keep in mind when you're evaluating how accurate this information still is inundated. Who else circled inundated? Hand. Anybody know what inundated means? Or can you use your context clues to kind of figure out what it might mean? Let me tell you, in this case, inundated is kind of like overwhelmed. So they're saying that kids are being overwhelmed with all these commercials about not so healthy foods. Okay? Now, inundated is a pretty powerful word. What could we say that's an example of? What is the point? What kind of persuasive technique is the author using here? Yeah. Maybe loaded language, right? Because isn't inundated meant to evoke like a strong feeling behind that word? Couldn't they have said kids are being faced with commercials? Or kids are seeing commercials? Right? Wouldn't that be like a little less binding of the third line? It says, now researchers have put numbers to those warnings. What does it mean to put numbers to those warnings? What does that line mean? Did anybody, actually by show of hands, who underlined specifically kids 8 to 12 see 50 hours annually? Because that's your age group, right? Did anybody do the math and figure out how many minutes per day? So they're saying, you guys fit into this group. They're saying 8 minutes of your day is spent watching these commercials. Does that sound like a lot?
Yeah.
How many, if they're about 30-second commercials, about how many commercials is that?
A lot.
8 minutes a day, 30-second commercials?
About
About 16, 17 commercials per day. Do you think you see that many junk food? No? You don't think so? I want you to look at paragraph 5. There's something I want to talk about here. It said that the viewing, so this study, took place primarily between late May and early September. And in that time, they said they saw over 2,600 commercials. What's going on with you guys between late May and early September? Come on. What's going on in your life? Raise your hand. Tisha. Summer, right? So do you think during the rest of the year, if they had done the study after September, that maybe there'd be more or less commercials? And don't pack up yet. I want to come back to this tomorrow because I want to talk about why this author may or may not have this bias, or are we overthinking it?
Thanks. All right. So basically, a lot to talk about, but we don't want to get into everything. But basically, what you're seeing there is a combination of the close reading with the students doing the annotated text, which is what you're seeing up here. Students are looking to identify areas of confusion, areas where they have questions, making notes in the margin, underlining, highlighting, getting in and interacting with the text, and then the follow-up questions that are the text-dependent questions, which specifically went towards author's word choice, bias, and the like in that lesson on display. And so in closing, how you can help. We talked a lot about things that may, in math, will even be perhaps more technical, but in regards to close reading, it's not that we want you to, whip out the highlights tonight and do a close read with your kid. But the most important thing you can do, and the research says, is that the more reading kids are doing, the more they're reading independently on their own, with text that they can, at their level, the greater their comprehension and fluency will be. So we just ask you to support students reading at home. That's the most important thing we can ask you to do. Talk to your child about what they're reading about. Create routines and structures for reading at home. We know that this community values it, and we can see that with our students when they come in every day, and we thank you for your support. So with that, I'm going to be bringing up Ms. Held to talk about the elementary library resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And a lot of what I have to say reiterates and supports the things that are going on in the classroom. What I'm going to share with you tonight are some of the library media resources that you can access to help support your child at home. And I am representing the elementary librarians, but all these resources are available to all elementary students and to all teachers. And your school library media specialist will be very happy to help you throughout the year with any of these resources. First, I'd like to start with the school library websites. Each school has a library website, and this is designed to help support the curriculum. And this is really the portal to all the print and digital resources that we have available to you. I'm going to be focusing, as you can see, we have a lot of resources, the online catalog, links to websites, ebooks, reading suggestions, and child-friendly search engines, as well as subscription databases. But tonight I probably could spend an hour, which an hour, I don't have, but I'm going to focus on the catalog and how your children select books, and some of our subscription databases that you can use to help support their reading. First, when the kids do come to the library to pick books out on a weekly basis, the whole goal is to really match the right book with the right child. And if you remember from seeing Mrs. Reed's class, that kids really do have their own unique interests. And even though there are some common interests at the elementary level, such as pets and sports and animals, those are some favorites, as they grow and become stronger readers and they are exploring the world, they really do have their own unique interests. So our job is really to try to match the books to the child based on the books that they're going to love to read. So these are some things to consider. Interest level, what are they interested in? Also, we really try to help them pick age-appropriate materials. They may be really excited to read about Harry Potter when they're in kindergarten, but the content level may not be appropriate. And we are trying to help them develop some background knowledge as well as draw on their prior knowledge. And one last element is readability. And Lexile level is one measure or one indicator of readability. And I'm just going to show you a slide to give you an idea of the different grade levels and the associated Lexile levels. And then to the right of that are some sample titles. I think that these titles are actually a bit, if you look at the grade level and the text range that it would be associated with, I wouldn't run home and say, oh my goodness, my child should be reading wholes when they're in third grade. This is just a very general indicator, one that you can use, but it is just only one measure. In the library, especially with the younger kids, we try to help them use the 5-finger rule, where they're, choosing a book, and if they read 5 words on a page that are too difficult, that would not be a book they choose. If they read 0 words on a page, then that may be too easy. So we just have some general rules to help them, find a text that's readable. But the more important thing is that they're choosing books that they're going to be very interested in. So in addition to selecting books from our catalog, our print resources, we have a lot of online resources, and these are the resources that you're going to be able to access from home. BookFlix and TrueFlix and TumbleBooks are online ebooks, and there's 2 different types of ebooks that kids can be reading. There are ebooks that are browsable, that they would read in a browser. They can read them on devices like this. Oops. They can read them on tablets. They can read them on their iPods. They can read them on laptops. They can read them on your standalone computer. They just need to have a browser to read them. So BookFlix matches, and I'm going to show you a slide of that in a minute, fiction and nonfiction. TrueFlix has nonfiction books for older readers, and TumbleBooks also have browsable books. Things like World Almanac for Kids and Kids Search are databases that your child can access to help support their schoolwork at home. They're short articles. There is Lexile information in them, and also they can use them just to pursue their own interests. They can access them in school, and they can access them at home. If you're accessing them at home, though, you do need to have, for our subscription databases, database logins, and on the back table in the hallway, each school library has supplied the login information for your child. And especially over the February break, these would be great if your children are going on the computer and on the internet. These would be great sites for them to access. Okay, so BookFlix is one of our databases, and in time for President's Day, here is a pairing of a video, which is a fiction book, with a nonfiction book about Abraham Lincoln. And so your child would watch the fiction video, and then the nonfiction is really like an ebook, like a traditional book that they would turn the pages. And then along the sides, there are extension activities where they have puzzlers that kind of help them build comprehension. They can learn more about the author and explore different websites. This is one of my favorite resources that we have for the kids, especially the younger kids in grades K through 3. And TrueFlix is very similar to this, more geared towards older students, and it's nonfiction. And the last resource that I'd like to talk about are our Overdrive ebooks that we have. This is very similar to the public library. If you've used ebooks, how many people have used ebooks from the public library? So if you know how to access ebooks from the public library, this will be very similar. And in school, they can browse these ebooks, and they can decide which ones they would like to read. They need to have a library, their library card number from their school district in order to actually browse. But what's interesting, though, this year there's a new feature where they can actually read in the browser instead of downloading, which is great. I think it makes it a lot easier for the kids to read these ebooks. But what's nice is that all these resources are really geared towards your students. It's their library, and so it's tailored to them. So, kids that live in Colony, can't come to our district. This is their library and their resources, and it's really built around them. So I hope that you and your children will have a chance to check them out and, use them for your research projects and just reading. good books that they would like to read. Okay, and with that, I am going to turn it over to the high school librarians, the middle school and high school.
So, all right. I'm Jenny Brown. I'm the high school librarian, and this is Sylvia Lilly.
I'm the middle school and the high school librarian.
So, we have some resources that we would like to show you that we feel support the common core or the curriculum for the high school and the middle school. Do you want to read that?
Sure. At the secondary level, we do a lot with classrooms, with teachers. They come down and use our resources. We make materials available to them in the library and to bring back to their classrooms. We work collaboratively as much as we can, and I think that it's always the advantage of a student to have somebody that is trained with their resources, working in conjunction with their classroom teacher who's the expert in the curriculum. And when we work together, the students certainly win. We provide individual and group instruction in the high school particularly because kids are coming in during free periods, during their time to do research and work on other academic endeavors, and we're available to work with them on a one-on-one basis as well. This button?
No, we weren't going to.
We actually may have to fix it up. No, it's fine. There you go. All right. So this is our middle school library homepage. We set this up so that on the right-hand side, on the bottom, you'll see our online databases. And again, we have a small yellow card for the middle school in the foyer, which has all of our passwords on it. There are also some things that have been selected for students here about books and reading. And then if your student, sometimes, you know, kids just get hooked on a particular series. They want to know what they should read next. And there are some links here to help them find great books, whether they're reading series or not. The databases that we use typically with the middle school, as I've come to learn in my year and a half in the middle school, we do a lot with the Gale resources. Some of those are purchased for us by the state, and then we add to them with our own local resources. And if you have a student who's working on a particular topic, if they're doing research on an individual, often children are inclined to go somewhere like Wikipedia, but we've tried to help them by showing them better resources that give them quality information. And one of the most wonderful things that I've been able to persuade kids to use these based upon this fact is if you were to do a search for, George Washington and find a number of, pieces of information about George Washington, and it's going, okay. If I wanted to use one of these items, let me just find something that would be usable. Okay, this is a pretty high Lexile. These turn up with Lexile numbers, so you can pretty easily identify whether it's appropriate for your student if you have a sense of their Lexile, which they're doing quite frequently in the middle school. They're testing for Lexile level. On the right-hand side, there's a citation tool maker, which kids are being asked and trained to appropriately credit where they got their information from. And if you have any sense of how complicated it is for kids now compared to when we were students. I mean, when we were students, there were books and there were magazines, and that was kind of it. And now kids have so many other resources that they have to be able to adeptly credit. And this will make a citation for them, which is MLA format, copy-paste, which may sound like a cheat way out, but really we don't want kids to have to do this all individually. We want them to understand the purpose and the process of it, and that has really been useful for us to work with kids. So there's that. And then we wanted to show you also, let's see, where's the, oh, here's a tab. Okay. And then to our high school homepage, which is similarly constructed in many ways. We have our databases from the high school are linked from here. This year we played around with it a little bit and we have them organized by discipline. So there are some general, topics and resources on the top. And then we have some really high-level stuff here. We have a database called JSTOR, which I don't know if any of you are familiar with from college days, but it is pretty much all the journals and resources that we could never afford to buy. There are thousands of them in there, and kids that are taking AP courses and college-level courses in the high school are using this pretty frequently. We were the first district in the area to bring this in.
Go Bethlehem.
So the JSTOR is something that we try to train on. The other thing from our catalog, Pam touched on it for the elementary buildings. The format of this is consistent district-wide. We have the same structure, essentially, of a catalog, and it basically looks like the public library's catalog as well if you clicked on that traditional search tab that they have on their catalog, which is what I always go to somehow.
And we have a direct link to Overdrive. And our books, if you are searching in the catalog, they do come up as an ebook.
It's just not going yet.
Okay.
It's capital Reach.
It's slow.
Okay. But if you can search our Overdrive collection, our online collection directly, and they also have a neat little collection here called Common Core Exemplar Texts. So when you're logged in here, which you would sign in with the student's barcode number, it will give you titles that are part of the Common Core Exemplar Texts. Some of them are audiobooks, some are ebooks that can be downloaded, and others, there's one other type of book, isn't there? There's audio, ebook, I guess that's it. Yeah. Okay. And we've really been trying to teach kids, particularly in the middle school where we get to see them more regularly in the library as a class, instructing them on how to do this, because the days of telling your parents that I don't have a book to read, I can't get one, those are done. Like, you can get a book, you can get a reference material.
24/7 access.
So we wanted you to be aware of that.
Yeah.
And if your student doesn't know their barcode number, if you want to know more information about this, certainly email us. Our email addresses are on the bottom of the webpage.
Their barcode number is actually on the back of their student ID, so they all have it.
Anything else? No, that's it. Okay, that's what we wanted to share. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, next up we have Dave Hurst, who's our math supervisor. Let me get you back in PowerPoint.
Good evening, my name is Dave Hurst. I'm the K-12 math supervisor. And I'm going to focus tonight on one of the things that I hear the biggest complaints about, and that is, why are you teaching my kids so many different ways to do these problems? I learned it this way, it works, so why is my child exposed to all these different ways? They also work, but the traditional way seems to be fine, so why are we inundating our kids with all these other methods that seem confusing to me? And basically it comes down to the process that the students are learning are what are called algorithms. Algorithms are just basically a step-by-step process in doing something. And it's interesting that in math, traditionally we've always thought there's this one way, the right way to do things. But sort of an easy analogy is, if I was to go out and ask 5 different people how they tie their tie, I could certainly end up with 5 completely different answers. And yet, everyone successfully tied their tie, and it looks okay. So who's to say method A is correct and method B is incorrect? Okay? In the United States, for some reason, we've always been driven by there's one way to do things. This is the way to do things. The problem that we have is that when you teach algorithms in that isolated fashion, it leads to a procedural or understanding. Not even a procedural understanding, but procedural fluency, if you will. A memorized set of steps to do something. All right? Memorized set of steps to do something that I'm not sure why I'm doing it. I'm not sure when to do it all the time. But I do know if somebody tells me this is the process you're supposed to use, then I can do it. And that's not what math's about, because when you're given a problem, the directions at the top in real life are not going to say, make sure you multiply these fractions by inverting and multiplying. It's just not going to say that. Students have to understand what it is they're doing, why they're doing it, and they have to be able to think through it. So by using alternate algorithms, it gives students another way of looking at things. And when I go through, I'm going to actually show you the alternate algorithm. So I invite you, if you have paper and pencil, to play along. You'll see that most of the alternative algorithms actually lead to the students are doing things that conceptually make sense instead of sort of a shortcut. All right? And when they get further along in math, most of these alternate algorithms tie directly into things that to do at higher levels. So our approach, and the approach of the Common Core, is to expose students to multiple algorithms. Let them become comfortable with more than one way to do things. In the end, it'll be their choice which one they like best. Right? But it should be their choice. It shouldn't be, this is the one way to do it, and you better learn how to do it this way. Because that's not what problem solving is about. Problem solving is about finding an appropriate way to do something and coming up with the correct solution. There might be 20 different avenues, and 20 different people might do them each a different way. But if the outcome in the end is all the same, then no one way is more right than the other. So I'm going to have a few videos. The first one, this is the way we sort of all learned how to do two-digit multiplication. I figured this was the easiest one to show because it's one that most people are familiar with. And this is actually the one I hear the most complaints about. Why can't we just do it this way? No one's saying you can't do it this way. But you should be able to explain why this method works, which I guarantee that if I ask most students, they don't understand the why. They just understand the how. So let me give you...
In this example, we will find the product of 59 and 27 using the standard algorithm. First, we need to multiply 59 by 7, and then we need to multiply 59 by 20. The 2 is in the tens place, so we need to make sure we remember the value of the 2. It's not just 2, it's 20. Let's look at the problem again. We'll multiply 7 times 9 to get 63. We'll carry the 6. Now, we'll multiply the 7 times 5, add the 6, and get 41. We'll then move to the next digit. We'll multiply 59 by 20. We'll add the 0 to show that we are multiplying by 10. 2 times 9 is 18. We'll carry the 1. 2 times 5 is 10, plus the 1 is 11. Next, we add to get our final product. 413 plus 1,180 gives a final answer of 1,593.
Now, I don't know if you noticed, but the one thing that I sort of tried to stress in the video was that we're multiplying by 20. And that's the piece that students lose. Because many times they're taught just, every time you move over, stick another 0 down. Or some teachers say, put an X there. I know that's the way I learned it. We didn't put a 0 there, we put an X there. That's not that doesn't even make sense conceptually. It's just a way of sort of doing things. So unless you're really, really stressing the fact that it is 20, you're just memorizing a process. You have absolutely no idea what you're doing or why. So another sort of more appropriate way to do things, in my estimation, is using partial products. This really hits home the place values. And actually, if you see some of these mental math experts that can multiply really large things in their head very, very quickly, this is one of the approaches they use. They do not use the standard algorithm. The standard algorithm works fairly well on paper. It does not work fairly well in your head because you're trying to carry just way too much stuff along in the wrong order. The nice thing about this method is when the students go to algebra, this is exactly what they're doing when they're multiplying a binomial times a binomial, like 2x plus 6 times 3x plus 1. All of a sudden, now the connection is made, as opposed to, well, now we're using letters, so we must be doing something completely different. No, it's the same thing. It's still the distributive property. So here's how this one works.
In this example, we will find the product of 59 and 27 using the partial product
Is it going to show?
algorithm. To do this, we will think of each factor as a sum of tens and ones. For example, we will think of 59 as 50 plus 9, and we will think of 27 as 20 plus 7. We will then multiply each part of one factor by each part of the other factor. So to begin, we will multiply the 50 times the 20 and the 50 times the 7. 50 times 20 gives us a result of 1,000, and 50 times 7 equals 350. We will now repeat the process with the 9. 9 times 20, 9 times 7. 9 times 20 equals 180, and 9 times 7 equals 63. Finally, we will add all of the resulting partial products to give us our final product, 1,593.
Now, if you think way back to when you did algebra, if you notice the way I was drawing those arrows, that's the distributive property that you would learn multiplying the 2x plus 6 times the 3x plus 1. So if students are comfortable using this method throughout their elementary years, when they get to the algebra piece, it's not some new process. That a lot of textbooks, you might remember the term FOIL from algebra. Again, that's just, you're teaching students tricks when you do that. It's not FOIL, it's distributive property. FOIL is just sort of a handy way to remember it, that now all of a sudden, again, you're back to just some sort of procedure. It leads to no understanding whatsoever of what you're doing. Okay, the other benefit of the partial product algorithm is that partial products can be demonstrated using arrays. And those of you with students in grade 3 are probably really familiar with the arrays when they're doing multiplication. 3 times 5 is no longer, just multiply 3 times 5 is 15. Or just memorize, if you forget it, it's 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3. It can be designed by, on graph paper, doing a 3 by 5 grid. Right? It relates back to area. Well, we can do the same thing here. Instead of doing 59 and 27, you break it up as we did on the model I just showed, and you end up with a 50 by 20 rectangle, a 9 by 20 rectangle, a 7 by 50 rectangle, and a 7 by 9 rectangle. Those are those individual partial products that we just found. So now we're taking the new material 2 by 2 digits, and it's relating back to what they did in 3rd grade when they were multiplying 1 by 1. And not that students would ever draw, you're not going to draw on graph paper 59 by 27, but once they see this and they understand how this is working, they can move it to a more simplified model where you're just using a 4 by 4 grid, and the work that's done within that grid represents what was just done on that model. This becomes a very, very easy way for students to organize their work without having to kind of keep track of things in isolation. So here's how this one works.
In this example, we will find the product of 59 and 27 using an array. Using an array or area model helps us see and organize the steps of multi-digit multiplication problems. We'll use our array box to help us keep things organized. First, we need to think about both factors in expanded notation. 59 can be thought of as 50 plus 9, and 27 can be thought of as 20 plus 7. We will now fill in the product for each section of the array. 20 times 50, 1,000. 20 times 9, 180. 7 times 50, 350. And 7 times 9, 63. We will then find the sum of our partial products. 1,000, 350, 180, and 63. Our final product then is 1,593.
And so if you compare what's in those boxes to what was done on the previous sort of model, they're the same exact numbers. The other benefit to doing it this way is all of those individual products can be done mentally. Because in essence, you're really multiplying one digit by one digit, and you're just keeping track of the number of zeros. So when students are doing 50 times 20, they're really doing 5 times 2, realizing that they're going to need the 2 zeros for the place value of 10 and 10. Okay, students are very adept at working with multiplying by tens, multiplying by hundreds, multiplying by thousands. And this process allows them to do that same thing mentally. The final method, and this is sort of an interesting one, in that people are like, what is this new crazy way of doing math? This new way of doing math that goes back to like 1100 AD. But somehow it's new and crazy, right? It's just new and crazy here in the United States. And again, it's more of just an organizational method, but it also goes back to place value understanding. So this may or may not be one that you've ever seen. I would say of the different ones that I've shown you, this is by far the least sort of presented to students. But for students that do use this method, they're very, very successful with it.
In this example, we will find the product of 59 and 27 using the 2x2 lattice that is drawn. This method is known as lattice multiplication. First, we will write one factor along the top of the lattice and the other along the right, one digit for each row or column. So we will put the 59 along the top and the 27 along the right. Next, we will multiply each digit in one factor by each digit in the other. We will write these products in the cells where the corresponding rows and columns meet. We will write the tens digit of these products above the diagonal and the ones digit below the diagonal. So 5 times 2 gives 10, 9 times 2, 18, 5 times 7, 35, and 9 times 7, 63. Finally, we will start in the bottom right corner. We will add the numbers inside the lattice along each diagonal. We will write these sums along the bottom and left lattice. If the sum on a diagonal exceeds 9, we will simply carry the tens digit to the next diagonal to the left. 3, 5 plus 6 plus 8 gives 19. We'll carry the 1. 1 plus 3 plus 0 plus 1, 5, and a 1. To understand why lattice multiplication works, note that the diagonals in the lattice simply correspond to our place value columns. The far right-hand diagonal is the ones place, the next one is the tens, and so on. Ones, tens, hundreds, thousands. So our final product, 1,593.
I think you can see the different benefits from each method. No one method is more right than the other. It's all about what students find most comfortable. Now, obviously, when you're first introducing these, it's expected that students would be able to demonstrate that they understand each method. But then at the end, once all the methods have been presented, it's part of their job is to decide which method works best for them. And they should be able to explain why that method's working. And that's what kind of got lost in algorithms in years past, is that it was more about how do I just get through this procedure as opposed to what does this procedure mean in terms of contextual. So just to sort of highlight again, so algorithms again are just a way of doing things. It's a process. Students should be able to invent their own methods if they can make sense out of them. It does promote conceptual understanding. It does encourage proficiency with mental math. Most of the alternative methods are all done mentally. There's very little sort of extra things you have to keep track of on the side. And like I said, most of the people that do the very high-level mental math, those sort of human calculator, I'm sure you've seen the ads on TV for the human calculator, most of what techniques he uses are not standard algorithms. Students tend to be more motivated because they can find success, and students understand that problems can be solved in more than one way. Part of the Common Core is being able to just defend your argument in terms of two students do problems two different ways, they get the same answer, be able to explain to each other why their method works. It's not about there's one correct way of doing things, it's about being able to explain how well you're doing things. And I think that's a really good segue into our next presenter, who's Kelly Ward, an elementary math teacher. She's going to focus much, much more on the conceptual side as opposed to the procedural side. Thank you.
Good evening. What you're going to see in just a few short minutes is a video that we did using some concepts and fractions, because I think second to the multiplication, that tends to be where we've had the most comments, questions, concerns out of parents in terms of why our instruction in mathematics has changed so greatly with the Common Core. I want to just mention, Dave showed you the many different ways to attempt the two-digit multiplication, and I'm sure some of you might have been thinking that that takes a lot more time to teach in the classroom. When you're just teaching one simple, straightforward algorithm, you can do a couple days of it and move on. And exposing students to multiple ways of doing something like that sure does take a lot more time. But part of the shift in Common Core standards is that we are given more time to cover less concepts in each grade level. So there is more time to dig much more deeply into concepts and to work towards mastering them before moving on. So for example, currently in 5th grade right now, we're working on fractions, and we might spend 6, even stretch it to about 8 weeks on fraction concepts. We're actually covering less material, but much more in depth and much more completely before we move on. So if you grabbed a flyer as you came in, on one side there was a math problem that asked you to do some multiplication of fractions, and I attempted in just a few very short minutes to show you how we work beginning in perhaps 3rd grade through 4th grade and 5th grade concepts and fractions, just so that you can see when you expose students to multiple different methods and ways of solving problems, and that the curriculum spirals from grade level to grade level, that it is quite possible for students to do things in fractions that they weren't able to do before. And that's sort of what the video leads you through. So instruction in mathematics has changed greatly with the implementation of the Common Core curriculum, and fractions is one of the areas where concepts are taught differently than they were in the past. So one of the problems we run into is that students who haven't had years and years of Common Core curriculum get stumped somewhere in 5th or 6th grade with something like multiplying fractions on a number line. But you can see, if you look at particular concepts over time, for instance beginning in 3rd grade, that by the time students have had the curriculum for several years, a problem like you saw this evening would be no problem. For example, in 3rd grade, students are asked to do things like identify part of a whole using a picture, like the one you see here. So if we were to shade a particular part of it, they would be able to name that fraction as 1/2. And similarly, if they were asked to identify part of a set, they would be able here to figure that half of the circles are shaded, and so 1/2 of the set is what we're looking for. Also in 3rd grade, and this is new to Common Core, we introduce fractions on a number line. So students know that between 0 and 1 there are some parts less than a whole, and they're able to identify, for example, that the line right down the middle also represents 1/2. So even in the early stages of instructing fractions, students are able to name fractions in at least 3 different ways. Then we find in the 4th grade that concepts build upon what was taught in 3rd grade, and that using similar diagrams and number lines, they're able to just build further knowledge with fractions. So one skill in 4th grade that becomes really important is finding equivalent fractions. Let's say we had the same part shaded of the circle. So students would be asked to find that that is, again, 1/2. Or, in this case, 4 out of a total 8 parts. And so without knowing the traditional algorithm of multiplying numerator and denominator by the same number, they're able to name equivalent fractions. And then again, when we're looking at parts of a set, the students might recognize that half of the circles are shaded, and they would also be able to count to see that 4 of a total 8 are shaded. And so yet another way that they can identify equivalent fractions. Again, without the traditional algorithm being introduced. Using a number line, which is pretty new to all of us in instructing fractions, we could build on the one they saw in 3rd grade, so they know that this midpoint represents 1/2. And by stacking number lines and breaking them up into smaller pieces, they would also recognize that 1/2 could also be written as 4 out of 8 total parts. So you can see how what they've learned in 3rd grade helps them to move into what will be taught in the 4th grade. By the time students get to 5th grade, they're asked to do things like multiply and divide fractions, and they're often required to do it in multiple forms. We still teach the traditional algorithm, so if I ask them to find 1/4 times 1/2, they would be taught eventually to multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators to get the correct answer. But in Common Core, that's not enough. So students need to be able to show this, again, at least 3 different ways. To show them a problem like this, over here on our circle, we would tell them that they are really finding 1/4 of 1/2. So we would start by finding our half, and then ask students to take 1/4 of that 1/2. And on a diagram, that's easy to do. And then they could explain that that's really one piece of a total 8. Similarly, over in this parts of a set picture, we would ask them to take 1/4 of 1/2. Half the circles here are shaded, and to take 1 out of those 4, they would indicate by drawing that that's 1 out of a total 8 pieces. Perhaps what's most difficult, but becomes really second nature to students, is to multiply on the number line. So again, taking 1/4 of 1/2, they would know first to take their whole number line and divide in half. And when they do that, they're looking at this section of the line, and then taking 1/4 of that, they would simply shade or somehow highlight one piece, which again, they can look to see is really one of a total 8 sections. So building on the concepts that they start early on in the 2nd or 3rd grade, by the time they get to 5th grade, working with a problem like this on a number line becomes a piece of cake.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is really a large portion of our introduction to Common Core in the classroom. And if I could have a wonderful round of applause for all of our presenters here today as they go ahead and get ready to take the stage right after Jill.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jill Mattis, and I'm a 7th grade math teacher here at the middle school. And I just wanted to talk to you about some of the resources that you have available as parents to help your students with their homework or, cover some of the lessons that we did during the school day. So at the K-5 level, students are using the Envision math program, and they've been using this for 3 years now. And after reviewing different programs for the past 2 years, I'm pleased to announce that the middle school will be using the Glencoe math program starting next year. Both programs offer a digital interactive experience for students, and these are closely aligned with the printed materials that they would receive in class. And students and parents will have access to the online version of the textbook. In addition to that, on the online version of the textbook will have practice assessments, they will have access to step-by-step modeling of problems, and they will also have access to digital manipulatives. So this is going to be a great resource for students, especially at the 6th through 8th grade level. You may notice that we've been using a lot of handouts in class. We don't often refer to our textbook, but starting next year we'll have that as a resource both in the classroom and outside of the classroom in which you can help your student at home. Thank you.
And if at this time also, can we start to have our panel go up on the stage to their respective seats. Ladies and gentlemen, this sort of brings about some of our question and answer time for our panel. The individual presenters that were providing information tonight also will be helping in some of our question and answer session. One of our presenters was unfortunately succumbed by the illnesses that are going around in schools these days, and that was Mr. Matt Burns, and he is unable to be here tonight, but we have Ms. Kathy Johnston here, our Director of Special Ed Student Services, SES, who will also be able to give some responses for students with special needs through the district. I'd like to thank all the panels here. I'm hoping that the microphone has the little red lights on it. We have up here also, I'd like to introduce Mr. Dave Rounds, who's also a high school social studies teacher, but he's also the president of the BCTA. And I'd like to thank everybody for giving their additional time throughout this for the community of Bethlehem. So to start, both Mrs. Monroe and myself have a couple questions, and then we will open it up. But one of the first questions that came in from our survey, and everyone can answer as they feel appropriate, is how will the new high school curriculum prepare students for advanced math classes like calculus, given the uncertainty of where Common Core is?
The Common Core really hasn't changed the level at which the curriculum will be presented at the high school level. The change really is some of the topics have shifted places. But if you look at our current structure of integrated algebra, geometry, algebra 2 trig, when we move to Common Core, some of the algebra 2 trig topics will move down to algebra 1. Some of the geometry topics move up to algebra 2 trig. But when you look at the whole scope of those 3 courses, they will be essentially the same preparation that students now receive in moving into a pre-calculus course and then a calculus course. So the rigor actually has increased in that the depth of learning has increased. So students should be more prepared to take courses like calculus than they had in the past.
One of the questions I have is related to special education. So perhaps Ms. Ward, being in a co-taught classroom, you could address this, is what kinds of modifications or how are special education students meeting the demands of the Common Core? What do you see in your classroom?
Sure. So I would be most comfortable speaking from the co-taught perspective because that's the program that I currently teach with my co-teacher who's not here this evening. But I don't think that modifications or the way that we present material has changed in terms of special ed students or regular ed students for that matter. In the co-taught classroom, students with special needs have a tutorial program, so they often have concepts introduced prior to them being taught in the classroom. And then they also have that tutorial time so that they can have concepts reinforced in small groups outside the regular ed setting. And that's the way we've always done things. It's just that we're now using the same types of modifications, and reinforcing skills that meet the Common Core standards as opposed to the old standards we were using. So it's not that anything's shifted dramatically in that way. We're still introducing and giving reinforcement and support to the students who need it.
Thanks.
One of the questions I have is, will required reading at the high school level be increased to reflect higher reading levels? Say, for example, a title, To Kill a Mockingbird, is that, at the appropriate level for 10E classes, or is that something that may shift downward or upward? Andy, or?
Yeah, I can answer that. I mean, in terms of curriculum, our cabinets that set curriculum would make those decisions. I wouldn't want to speculate on, where literature would shift or whether it would shift or not. But I will say that in terms of alignment of the text complexity with high school level classes, absolutely. We not only the literature, but we also bring in nonfiction that we specifically look at a higher level so that we can challenge students and engage them with more complex text. In terms of the literature that we have, we feel it's generally aligned, not just in terms of lexile, which is one measure, but also in terms of our qualitative factors such as thematic content, audience, the content of the novels in regards to the types of issues that are raised and can be explored and discussed with students of higher maturity and reading ability.
Thank you.
The next question I think could be answered by many people up here is, what challenges has Common Core presented for you in the classroom in being able to prepare students appropriately to meet the new standards? I don't know if I have any volunteers, teachers who want to respond to that.
Well, I know at the high school, we have a lot of teachers who are doing research papers, and they're tweaking their research papers to better meet the standards that the Common Core has. So we are alternating our research skills to meet those needs in the library.
I think one of the biggest challenges has been that third graders are suddenly meeting the Common Core standards for third grade, but we're not exposed to those same things in K1, 2. And as time goes on, I don't think we're going to notice such a big difference. Even within a year, we're noticing, especially in math, we noticed that our second graders came much more prepared and ready to deal with the third grade Common Core standards. So
I noticed that in 7th grade math, a lot of our students have some gaps in their skills because they don't have some of the prerequisite skills. So those are some of the challenges that we as teachers are trying to overcome too.
One of the questions in the area of math, and I think this can also be at multiple levels, do students have to show their work if they do their work in their head specifically? That's one of the issues that are out there, especially when we've seen so many different platforms and algorithms and options for mathematical standards.
There's a sort of a difference between showing your work and explaining your work. If work is done in the head, meaning basic computation, students should still be able to justify that number. That's not to say that if you're just multiplying 2 times 5, you certainly don't have to write down on the paper 2 times 5 equals 10 and explain why. But if your answer is 10 because you multiplied 2 and 5, you should be able to justify why you're doing that. So it's more about, there's sort of a difference between justification and showing work. Justification is really at the heart of problem solving. Showing your work is just a computational, showing a demonstration that you understand the process. Depending on the level, when you get to the higher levels, all computation is done via calculator. So there is no work to show. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to justify your answer. So I guess you have to sort of be able to distinguish between what is showing work versus what is justifying an answer. And depending on the level, that description sort of changes.
How about at the elementary and middle school?
I would just add that because Common Core introduces students to so many different ways and so many different non-traditional algorithms like you saw in the videos this evening, that for a lot of students it's been sort of free. They can show their work in multiple different ways. They might use words, like writing out the actual thinking they used. Mm-hmm. They might use a tape diagram or a number line. They might draw a picture. And so there's many more ways to show work that are acceptable. And they're getting more and more comfortable and sort of building their toolkit of methods to pull from.
Jill, do you have anything? Or?
Well, I agree with everything Kelly said. I think the more options that the students have in how to show their work and justify their answers, they'll become more comfortable even just answering the questions instead of very often we used to see students leaving questions blank.
I know we showed like the ELA online resources. Are there also online resources as well for the math department?
Well, right now for K through 5, they're using the Envision series, which does have an online component. And parents should speak to their child's classroom teacher to get an access code for that. As Jill stated, we've been spending the last 2 years reviewing middle school math programs. We've just selected one, and next year that will come with a full online program where parents will have access not only to sort of the print content, but actual videos. So for problems that are presented in class, you'll be able to actually click on that problem, and you'll have a teacher step-by-step explaining how to do that problem, similar to the videos that I showed you on the multiplication. In terms of outside resources, probably the best one that parents can utilize is LearnZillion. LearnZillion has millions of video clips of teachers doing presentations on different topics. And that's probably the safest place to go in that those are all created by teachers and they're sort of go through an approval process. There's a lot less weeding out in terms of, like if you just did a YouTube search, you'll find a lot of not so good videos before you find a decent one. So I would suggest LearnZillion is probably the best resource that's out there.
And then just from a library point of view, there really aren't databases that are created for traditional math. For some of the higher level courses that we offer, AP statistics, other classes that have math orientation to them like economics, we definitely have databases and materials to support those sort of endeavors.
This question is, I think I can probably answer it very quickly. Is this true? There's no Common Core standards for social studies and science. There aren't new standards for social studies and science. The state is currently looking at potentially changing those. However, they've not made movement on that. However, if you look within the Common Core learning standards, there is an entire section on science and social studies specifically. A lot of that has to do with research and nonfiction. So there is a science and social studies component within the Common Core. If you look at the learning standards, which we have posted online, you can see specifically what those are. But a follow-up question, and this may be a little loaded, it might be a little too early to even assess, but Do you believe that the Common Core will eventually or will improve student learning? And I'll open that to anyone who care to take that on.
Well, I would take it on from the writing standpoint, and I would just look at what our kindergarten students are doing. And I know in one kindergarten class I'm in, not only are they writing a lot more and able to stick with writing, but it's just a small measure. We use Ames Web as a measure of how they segment letters, and that class did exceptionally well across the board in the ability to do that. So that would be one small measure. But the other measure that would be more important than Ames Web would be their engagement. And kids really want to write now. When you walk in this kindergarten, it's not unusual for them to write 30 minutes and they're 5. So I think just the level of engagement will improve achievement.
And from the math perspective, I think the increased focus on conceptual understanding can't but help students do better in math. You can forget an algorithm, you can't forget understanding. And it's as simple as that. The traditional method that we were teaching in the past was we would do the same exact content with students for 2, 3, 4 years in a row and hope that by the 4th year it stuck. Well, it didn't always stick. And if it did stick, students were able to simply manipulate numbers but had absolutely no idea why they were manipulating them or when to manipulate them. Whereas now there's a much, much more focus on the conceptual understanding piece, which if you truly understand something, then you can fall back on all of your different strategies and develop an answer without necessarily having memorized an algorithm. And I think if you talk to the 3rd grade teachers, they're seeing a huge increase in the level of understanding students have, because we actually started Common Core a year early for K-1-2. So our 3rd graders are now, this is actually their 4th year in Common Core, and we've seen huge improvements in terms of what they understand and their ability to explain things than we had in the past.
I have just 1 or 2 more, and we have about 10 more minutes. I have a concerned parent that has a kindergartner who has little time during the school day for free play or imaginary play that developmental specialists believe is very important. Would you, as supervisors or teachers, recommend that parents ensure that young children utilize the limited time that they have at home for imaginary play? Your thoughts, anyone?
Thanks. I think we have to be very careful with the term developmentally appropriate, because certainly what was developmentally appropriate 5 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago has changed. So sometimes we say something isn't developmentally appropriate, but I'm not sure we really know what kids can do. I think that the kindergartens I've been in, and it's true, I'm only in 3, what I'd be more concerned about is whether they're joyful learners. And I think if we create joyful learners, they will use their imagination to solve problems and to conquer things and to think critically. And I think it has to be a balance. Just as there needs to be time in school to have those things, there has to be time at home for those things also. So I think it's a balance, and I think as long as we have joyful learners, that's the most important thing.
I don't have any other questions.
One of the others, and the last one before we take some remaining questions, is in the news, and this is coming from the superintendent's perspective, especially today. There's been a lot of talk about the Common Core. The legislature, the governor should maybe take action and redo it themselves, and so forth, as well as there's news stories about whether you support the Common Core or not. From the teacher's perspective, the supervisor's perspective, I'd probably ask Dave a little bit about that. What are you hearing? What are you feeling? What are your thoughts on this for BC's perspective and what our fine teachers do here?
The Common Core issue should be a simple one. It's not. And the reason why it's not is because it's been convoluted by really 4 different things. You have a meshing of commissioner regulations that often coincide with or conflict with state law. And so the debate over Common Core, the debate over standardized testing, the debate over APPR has all become one big muddled mess, when in reality it's really three very separate things. The Common Core itself has created debate, whether or not it's developmentally appropriate, does it truly foster greater understanding, is it the right educational reform? But besides that debate, it's been mixed in with the testing piece. And part of the reason why is because under New York State law, teachers are required now to be evaluated, which is very reasonable. But part of that evaluation is based between 20 and 40% on state testing. So when the state rolled out the new curriculum, or I don't want to say curriculum, I get my hand slapped when I say that, when we rolled out Common Core, it coincided with the exact same timing of the new teacher evaluation system. So the state, by law, had to start assessing teachers on standardized tests. 20% of the teacher evaluation is based on standardized tests. That happened at the exact same time that the transition to Common Core was being done. Common Core itself is not an assessment, but when you're implementing a new curriculum, at the same time, by law, you have to implement a new testing system. The two got meshed together. So teachers are being evaluated based on standardized test results at the same time that they're implementing a new curriculum. And it just became an overbearing process. I mean, to be honest with you, half those math things that were up there tonight, I've never seen before. Because I, like you, learned them, one step at a time, or just that one approach. The teachers who had to implement Common Core in 1 year had to make that transition. And it was a transition that had to happen in 1 year because at the end of that year, there was testing that was going to assess the kids and testing that was going to assess the teachers, but it wasn't necessarily tied to the Common Core implementation. So if you look at those approaches, the 4 or 5 different methods just to do double-digit multiplication, I mean, for 30 years, some of the teachers in the state have only been required and taught one approach. And then the very next year, they're teaching up to 5 different approaches. At the same exact time, the state has completely changed its testing system, which wasn't really about Common Core. It was more about us up here. And so when those two factors came together, it just created an absolute firestorm, which is why teachers across the state have really been, and parents too, parents more than teachers, have been asking for the moratorium on Common Core. But it wasn't to get rid of Common Core. The moratorium was about creating a 3-year delay so that perfecting the process of how you teach kids the 5 different methods of now doing a multiplication could be practiced with. They could get the proper resources from their school district, from the state, to actually do it properly, rather than have to do it on the fly without the resources. So the Common Core moratorium is about delaying it so it can be done right. Okay, I'm not a pilot, okay, but I have a pretty good sense that I would not be allowed to go fly a plane unless I had the proper practice and the time to prove that I knew how to do it, to get the proper training. But essentially, we threw teachers in the state right into a system that they received very little training for. And so the moratorium on Common Core isn't really related to testing. The moratorium is about slowing down the implementation process so it can be done right. Then you have on a whole nother issue, the moratorium on the testing piece, which is as the kids are making the transition, I think, I can't remember who said it, I think Val said it, that you had 3rd graders who didn't get Common Core K1, 2, but yet they were tested as if they got that Common Core, all along. So the moratorium on testing piece is about phasing into testing to make sure that the kids have actually received the instruction that they are being tested on, so the testing is more meaningful and actually reflects what it is that they were learning. And then at the same time, we have the APPR piece. And yes, the commissioner released the 19-point plan today to meet the concerns of the parents. The reality is that recommendation by the commissioner, most of that stuff has already been implemented. And of those 19 points, 11 of them are minor things that they've been forced to do. And the other things may or may not address the problem. I mean, the commissioner acting to delay the testing is a good start. But you also, even if you do that, you're in conflict with state law. because state law still requires that teachers be evaluated by standardized testing. So you have a situation now where, because of parental concerns and teacher concerns, the region appears to be moving in a better direction with delaying the testing, but at the same time, you still have state law that says exactly the opposite. So one of the concerns now is, okay, the Board of Regents backs off Common Core. They back off the testing so it could be done properly, but you still have state law that requires school districts to provide standardized tests to evaluate, not the kids, to evaluate us. So it was a nice progress today that the commissioner actually realizes maybe slowing down is a good idea, but it's become such a meshing of different regulations and laws that there's still a lot that needs to be worked out at the state level.
And just to piggyback on what Dave said, and also what Dave Hurst mentioned before, I do believe Common Core standards will help increase student achievement, but I don't believe, until they get it right, that we're going to see those results in the form of New York State test scores. And so there has to be other ways for us to measure them locally in our own classrooms and in your homes to see those benefits.
Okay, at this time, we have a couple minutes for some questions directly from the parents that we haven't asked already on the Common Core. If you raise your hand, either Jody or I will get around to you. Oh, no, I'll... And then we have about 5 to 6 minutes, and then we'll do a brief wrap-up.
It's hers, not mine. And grandparents, right? If more time is spent, if more, quote, more time is spent to teach fewer concepts in math, unquote, at what point do students catch up so that they are more prepared for those high school math courses and ready to go into advanced calculus, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, the misconception seems to be that because we're spending more time each grade level, we're somehow skipping things over the continuum. If you look back at our old standards, let's use the middle school curriculum, for instance. Grades 6, 7, and 8 essentially did the same exact thing for 3 years. So now you're taking that curriculum and splitting it back up. So 6th grade does a third, 7th grade does a third, and 8th grade does a third. So by the end of 8th grade, that 6th through 8 continuum is exactly the same as it previously was. And actually, you're doing a little bit more. Some of the freshman topics have actually been moved down into 8th grade and so forth. So when you look at the entire, let's say, K through 8 curriculum continuum, you're still getting the same breadth of material that you got in the past. It's just that you're spending smaller chunks of time, individual years, to make sure that that's mastered rather than repeating the same topics year after year after year. If you look back at traditional 6th, 7th, and 8th grade textbooks, they're exactly the same. The only difference is when you go from 6th to 7th grade, they make the numbers a little bit bigger. And then when you went to 8th grade, they made them even bigger. But overall, 80% of the curriculum was exactly the same. So when you now look at it, K through 8, you're still getting all of the content that you got years prior. It's just that you're learning, when you actually sit down and learn it the first time, you're going to learn it correctly and in depth. So you're not missing topics. So I know when people hear that things are slowing down and they think, oh, that means that by the end of 8th grade, they've only learned like 2/5 of what they used to learn. No, that's not true at all. They've actually learned more if you look at what they're doing, because many high school topics have moved down.
That trend is continuing in all the advanced classes. The College Board is in the process of a major overhaul where they're backing off content and they're focusing more on skill-based learning. The content still is there, but it's being de-emphasized to do the same type of thing, focus more on skills. I teach Advanced Placement American History. That's the AP course that is the most taken in the entire country. And next year, they are implementing a huge overhaul where the test now focuses on every single president. The multiple choice section next year is going to focus on 6 presidents. That's it, just 6 presidents. But it's going to focus on those presidents in a way that's designed to kind of teach more analytical, in-depth skills. You're seeing that trend even at the advanced level too. So I would reiterate that, Dave's saying they're not missing it, but when you get to the high school, that same reform is occurring. For advanced placement, absolutely.
Hi, I have a question on, like you guys covered on the ELA, and students are encouraged to read at home, like 15 minutes or half an hour every day, like that. My question is that, how do I know that student gets it, what he reads it? Or he's just reading it because he's supposed to read it?
Couldn't hear it. We couldn't hear the question up here.
My question is that, how do you know the student, like they are supposed to read it every night, like 15 minutes or 20 minutes, and they fill the log for the reading. So how do I know he really understands it, what he's reading it? Or he's just reading it because he's supposed to read it and get our signature of 15 minutes every day?
Yeah, I can take that one. So if I understand the question correctly, you're asking, so students are, we're telling you that students should be reading, and students are assigned to be reading independently at home. How do we know that they're really progressing with reading, or just kind of reading, for reading's sake, I suppose?
Right.
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, the reality is we're consistently looking to make this process one whereby we have greater accountability that students are not only just reading, but also are comprehending what they're reading. And I could go into quite a long answer on it, but I'll just point that our teachers at every level work to make sure that they engage with students in the classroom to ask them about what they're reading about, that students are accountable through either some kind of reading response or activity-based that, where they have to respond to what they're reading. We also now, with our new SRI assessment at the middle school and also at the elementary level, feel that we're not shooting in the dark. We're able to find text that better matches where students are. It's not an exact science, but it's a lot better. I'll give you a quick example to highlight that. So, you have a child who is in 5th grade who is interested in sports. You could, 2 years ago, you'd go to the library, you'd put in sports, you'd get 10 books would pop up on the screen. You'd look at the covers. Very difficult to tell Lexile level and difficulty from a cover. Can't really judge it by its cover. Now we get a more closely approximated measure that is more aligned to where students are. And even though it's not a perfect science and it's not completely precise, and there are variations to different students' Lexile and their reading ability and what they should be reading, we can identify books that are going to be closer to their level, that you should be able to see students' fluency increase as they read more. And as you engage with them about what they're reading, and that partnership and parent partnership is very important. So great question, not an easy answer, but I think we have a lot of measures in place to try to address that concern.
I would just add to that if a child is reading at home, if they're reading it fluently with expression, there's a better chance that they're comprehending than if they're not fluent. So if they're stumbling over a lot of words, it's taking a long time to read, that might be an indication that they're really not comprehending it because they're not reading it fluently.
We have time for 2 more questions, then we'll do a brief wrap-up. I have one back here. I know Jody has one up there. What we would ask is those that have other questions that we might not be able to get to, please get a card from Mrs. Gardner, who's right down here. Joellen, if you could raise your hand. And put those on there so that we can also have our panelists as well as the district respond on our website to try to get those for follow-up. So, Jody?
Hi, Mr. Hurst. I was wondering, I understand what you're saying in terms of their appreciating that there are multiple ways to get to an answer to a problem. But I guess I have some questions myself, or some concerns, because as I'm helping my child through these different methods, I'm not seeing any of them that take a shorter amount of time, that seem to be more efficient in getting at the right answer. And while, again, I understand it, it's kind of interesting to look at a way to do things that was used in 1100 AD, as a result-oriented person and having worked with and for result-oriented people, I don't see why we're spending so much time on all these different ways of doing things to learn place value, when especially, as I'm understanding, at the higher levels, they're working on a calculator anyway. Do you see this as making a big difference here? Because I'm not seeing it.
I think the more proficient you become in any one of those methods, obviously the speed increases. each one of those videos was actually about exactly the same length. So I'm not sure that one method is any quicker necessarily than the other. It all depends on your comfort level of proficiency. For instance, the second method that I showed you, a student that's very, very comfortable with that method actually wouldn't have to write anything down, would have been able to do that problem in their head, which is much, much quicker than the traditional algorithm. So it all comes down to comfort level. What might be really, really quick in one person's mind might not be as quick in someone else's. So, just because you can do the standard algorithm in 30 seconds and the other ones take you 45, maybe another student can't do the standard algorithm at all, but they can do one of the alternative ones in 30 seconds. So, it really comes down to each individual student's comfort level. But if they're never exposed to the different ways of doing things, then how do they find the method that works best for them? And traditionally, when we only taught using the standard algorithm, what happened to the student that just never got it? We basically just said, well, I don't know what to tell you. That's the way to do it. You better figure it out. And then that kid went for the rest of their life not knowing how to multiply 2-digit by 2-digit because they only knew the standard algorithm and that method just never made sense to them. So in the past, we really did. We left a whole group of students behind because they never understood the one way that was taught. So what might be quick and proficient for one person isn't necessarily the same as for somebody else. So I can understand for the people that grasp things quickly and can do the standard algorithm quickly how it might be frustrating, but you have to also understand that there are many students out there that method just does not work for, and even if it does work for them, maybe that's not the quickest way. So at the end of the day, students have to be able to make a decision which method works best for them, but they're not going to know which method works best for them if they don't see other methods as well.
Hi, I have a question. Do the math resources that are available to the parents, will they have, or do they have answers and steps to homework questions? I'm asking this because it would be helpful for the parents who are trying to help their children, and then rather than waiting till the next day and see if the child could go find out the answers from the teacher. Or sometimes I've even been wrong about problems, and then it looks like my kid's wrong, but it's really me showing them something the wrong way.
It's sort of a yes and no answer. It depends on what's been assigned. The online resources obviously don't solve every single problem in the textbook. So, if problems are hand-selected so that those solutions are available, then yes. But if there's problems that are selected that aren't necessarily online, then either the answers and/or the video to accompany it may or may not be present. So it's really a case-by-case basis depending on which problems are presented. What do the teachers use? They have access to all the answers, but not necessarily a video explanation of the answer.
The Pearson, for the K-5 curriculum, the Pearson Envisions program that we're using has a certain set of materials accessible when teachers give parents the access code, which is what many of my colleagues have done. But when teachers access it, they then have access to the entire program, just like in the old days when we used to get handed big manuals with the answers all in red. And so we have access to a much greater variety of materials. So like an answer key to a homework, or some more in-depth explanations, or different ways in which students might do the explain your thinking type questions, things of that nature. But I think parents who are using the online Envisions program have found that there's at least one good example of how to solve a particular type of problem in any given concept. And then that same solution can be, or that same process rather, can be applied to other problems.
Well, so 6 through 8, we are purchasing a program for next year. So right now, your best resource for trying to get help with 6 through 8 would be, like I said, Learn Zillion, which won't, again, it won't necessarily be the exact same problem, but you should be able to find one similar in nature that you can then apply that process. The high school, we're not using a Common Core aligned textbook series per se, in that this is the first year of implementation. So we've created our own materials. So obviously, because we've created our own materials, there's no videos necessarily to go along with it.
What I will suggest is if you could write some of those questions down as well with Joellen, I'll ask Mr. Hurst to follow up as well with our final questions to the website. We try to stick as much as possible to a time schedule. I know there's other questions that are out there, but one of the things we wanted to make sure that you're aware of is some of the resources and testing. Common Core resources, like some of the questions, you can find out by visiting our website. And this presentation will also be posted on the website so that you have easy access to the information as well as the web address on this slide. But also, we need to talk about implementation and testing itself. New York was one of the first states to test students based on the Common Core last spring. The implementation in all of our minds, I think you heard tonight, as well as you would hear from me as a superintendent. It was something that was rushed. The implementation was not necessarily the best laid groundwork to try to pull off something successfully. But it is what it is, and we move forward because as professionals, as our teaching staff are, our administrators, and most importantly, our students are at learning new material, we persevere. We will try to make sure that we do what's right for our students here at Bethlehem. And I have every confidence in the individuals up on the stage, as well as the over 300 plus professionals that do it every day to meet the rigors and the challenges of what's known as a Bethlehem education. I would like to say on behalf of Ms. Monroe, as well as our faculty and staff, our curriculum is strong and it will remain strong. It will, as always, represent the teachers and the high standards that they wish to see into the classroom and most importantly for our future generations and the students they serve. But despite a drop in the proficiency levels as a result of last year's Rush State test, many changes of that content on the state exam are certainly inevitable, and I think you're starting to see some of that. But we still have to move forward. It's not going to change overnight as quickly as it was put into place. So what we need to do is talk about and have an honest discussion about opting out. I don't try to run away or shy away from this discussion. We had this discussion at the beginning of the year. And I also have to be honest with you. In New York State, and Bethlehem Central specifically, because that's us, there is no opt-out procedure for students in New York State. In other words, if a student is in school on testing day, they must be presented with the test. It is the law in Commissioner Regs that we, as a Board of Education and a district administration, and the faculty must willfully comply with. There is no option. So therefore, a student will be presented with the test. Students always have choices, but those choices will have implications for their educational future. Whether they're positive or negative, I can't tell you, but I can tell you we would ask that students always just try to do their best. I agree with what Mr. Round said. The combination of assessments linked to evaluations and testing for testing, not to serve education, but to serve another calling, is not necessarily appropriate. But the information based on trying to reach that standard is what we want to build to. And therefore, if we just do our best, and we are hopefully grateful that the state will share the data, that will help inform our instruction based on where we go in the future with the students we serve to meet the global marketplace standards that our students are going to need in their future. When I say they have to come on that day, some people say, well, I'll have the student miss that day. Well, that's good. But when the student comes back during a makeup day, they are obligated to be administered the test. So, in essence, to opt out, the only real way that you have that is for sure that the student would not see the test is they would have to be absent every one of those days, which is anywhere from possibly 6 to 12 days. Now, obviously, that will impact a student's education, and we don't really support that, and we would ask you, put the faith in these teachers, the teachers of this district, the administration of this district, because they are trying to make sure your students have the best education possible. We will still have to go through the road bumps. We want to do it as peacefully as possible and as successfully as possible. And of course, we don't encourage the students being absent for that length of time. It also puts us in a quandary. So we just wanted to share with you some of that in regards to it, because it is a movement that's out there. Unfortunately, in New York State, the laws are very clear for us. As we bring about a close to it, I'd like to one more round of applause for our participants up here. They give tirelessly of their time, and we want to thank them for everything they do to make this transition as best possible for Bethlehem. I would also remind you, we are heading into budget season, so I'll get the quick ad blitz out. February 26th is a board meeting. I know one of our board members is here tonight, Ms. Lynn Lenhart, but we will be rolling out our budget as well as some information on the state of the schools. I would say initially, it's not as bad as it could be. It's not as good as it should be. But if you would go to our advocacy page, we really need your help. These orange buttons that we wear are about mending the GEA. And that is money that is promised to each district in New York State that is taken back each year for the past 5 years so that the state can balance its budget. You are hearing that there's a surplus. If there's a surplus, they shouldn't be taking money back. If you can, please write the governor, write the legislature, write everyone you can, and just demand our students have a constitutional right to this funding for education. And that will make a significant difference. For us, it's $3.4 million a year. We would have a much different discussion during budget season. Last, I'd like to just mention that there will be a parent-centered initiative on February 25th at the middle school library, and it's entitled Embracing a Higher Standard, the Common Core. This is about parents discussing the Common Core to help parents help their students. And we want to commend the Parents for Excellence group in the district for putting this together so that it's time for the parents to discuss it, not necessarily for teachers and administrators. And we commend them for taking a leadership in conjunction with the BCTA, the BPA, and everyone here at the district. So on behalf of the Board of Education, myself, I know it's been a long evening. We want to thank you for coming out for something that's so important. Have a good night.
There's some crazy people in that.